As an investigative journalist, I'm going into really hard places over and over again, whether I'm interviewing, mafia bosses or looking at, survivors of a war-torn area. And I got into journalism because I wanted to hold truth to power and I wanted to make changes in the system. And I had this idea in my head that once you expose the criminals, once you expose the bad people, authorities come in and there's a response and the world changes. The reality is that that never happens. That almost never happens. So you got to take your wins where you can find them.
So if that almost never happens, what drives you to continue to do what you do? Because that does seem like a more nihilistic outlook. What would you say motivates you to keep uncovering stories like this?
It's a really good question. I do not have a good answer for that because, uh, you know, I got into this to change the world, and the world, has turned decidedly against reporters. In the last since when I started in, basically 2001. I started. Some of my first stories were covering September 11th from ground zero, and I think I left college with this idea that that journalism would change the world. And what I've actually seen, and I think what we've all seen, is instead the world has turned against journalism, right? The world has come in and said that journalists are fake news media, the mainstream media are all sellouts. And there's some good critiques there because there are some real problems with the mainstream media. But I've seen sort of a willingness to ignore journalists' deaths, ignore the sacrifices that journalists do. This year, 54 journalists have been murdered, mostly in Gaza, but all around the world. And and I see a celebration of an attack on journalism. And the thing to me that always gets me as a journalist who's worked for the mainstream and now I'm sort of independent media, is that where are you going to get your information from if people aren't out there collecting it? And why do we hate people who go out there trying to tell the truth and not making a lot of money doing it? Why do I continue? Because I have a passion for it. Is it smart? Is it safe? Is it no, it's not. In either case, I've almost been murdered on multiple occasions. I've had assassins following me around on at least 2 different occasions, and, I do not like it. I do not like that reality.
You've had assassins follow you around on 2 different occasions.
Yep. Yeah, so once, in India, once I did a story on the, mafia boss in Bangalore, and then I had this well-known assassin who I interviewed always wanting to meet up with me, and I had to, fake that I wasn't in the country and, that sort of thing. And another time I had a very right-wing activist out of Arizona, got very upset that I shut down his website, which was called bombislam.com, which I bet you it's back up now.
Yeah.
He got very upset with me,
It's probably on
and
Twitter.
yeah, it's now actually it's now a official government site, actually, it's
Yeah.
bombislam.gov now. And no, he threatened to bomb my house and do some things like that, and, that was fun.
Gee, I feel like you mentioned the people not caring as much about journalism or the sort of like the decay of modern journalism. I do feel like the tides are shifting, and this conversation I feel like could be evidence of the like not me specifically, but like the reason that I came across your stuff was because you posted it on YouTube.
Mhm.
And I am a consumer of a lot of the things that you have investigated, or was a consumer in the past, like athletic greens. We'll get into Huberman, Wim Hof method. Like there's a lot of things that have been in my life from a consumer standpoint, and I was not aware of the scandals that were sort of
Mhm.
hiding in the depths behind these products and behind these services. So I do feel like this, at least in the small microcosm of individuals discovering work like yourself and work like other journalists, is evidence that the tide is shifting a little bit to people taking the burden on themselves of like, I'm gonna start looking into this shit, and like I'm gonna watch this YouTube documentary
Mhm.
and see what's up.
Sure, I think there's there's a couple ways to think of that. I started out in the mainstream media because, mainstream media had money, they could pay me. They had distribution because oftentimes they owned the means of distribution, whether through printing presses or radio waves or things like that. You'd turn on your TV and you'd see a journalist. That started changing in like 1998. Maybe even 96 when Google started, basically all the newspapers gave away their their content for free on the internet, and they made people pay for paper. It was a dumb idea, and that led to the decline of mainstream media profits, right? That all of that, and with the editorial support, the legal review, and there was honestly very good, robust institutions until probably until about the mid early 2000s, right? Maybe 2010 in there. We had these robust institutions, and those all started to collapse. And so the stories that you talked about, and I have this YouTube channel, it's called Scott Carney Investigates, and that's where you found it. What is interesting is the stuff that I used to do in the mainstream media, going after grifters, going after criminals, going after, doing actually, and oftentimes very big budget things. I'd be flying to a country, I'd be living there for a while, hard stuff. Um, the magazines then stopped doing that kind of reporting, at least for freelance people like me, because they're worried about being sued into oblivion because
Mm,
defamation suits got more costly. They had such declining revenues they couldn't support those investigations, and audiences weren't really coming to them. So I sort of jumped ship, so officially probably about 2.5, 3 years ago, and decided that I couldn't do the journalism I wanted to do in the mainstream media for a number of for those reasons and maybe a few more. And a lot of the stories that you see on my YouTube channel now started out as pitches to mainstream media outlets that mainstream media outlets then rejected because they were worried about being sued. All of these problems that wouldn't have been a problem in the 2010s have cropped up, and what we see is the mainstream media are basically cowards.
mm.
They don't have the ability or will to fight that they used to have. So what we've seen is a huge exodus from the mainstream media of these good journalists who are now on YouTube. They're on Substack, some Patreon. They're starting their own newsletters, and they still have this will to fight. They just don't have the resources that we used to have.
So when you jump ship from mainstream media, these corporations that have massive budgets, even though the views seem to be dwindling, the money injections are still there. I presume that your budget for Scott Carney Investigates pales in comparison to the budget for someone like, you know, CNN, Rolling Stone, Variety, like people that are going to or once uh,
Mm,
budgeted these types of investigations. How are you handling the legal aspect of that on your own? Are the
mm,
people you go after, are they particularly litigious? Are you drowning in lawsuits essentially with your YouTube channel? Like
mhm.
how are you navigating that?
So the money from journalism is definitely less than it used to be. In the mainstream media, you used to be in 1999, you would be paid $5 a word at a magazine like Wired in order
Mhm.
to when you would put out your stuff. And now it's like $1 a word. So do see it's not like there's still a lot of money in the mainstream media. No, we see a rapid decline and a cutting back of budgets all across across that spectrum of mainstream media. So that has fallen apart. It's still more than you see in the independent media, and the mainstream media is still competing in the same feeds. So discovery for a mainstream media story is often on Facebook. It's often on Twitter. It's often on Threads, or all of these other platforms that we're on, and they have to compete in those same feeds as everyone else. So when I jump ship, I am in a way no longer depending on the when they owned the means of distribution. I'm not I they don't really own it anymore. Now it's the tech platforms that own the means of distribution. So by dropping them, I am a little closer to the viewer than I would have been otherwise. On the other hand, I really don't get paid very much. I could at least still be guaranteed like $5,000 a story now if I was working with them. And now if I post something on YouTube, like I can make 5 grand, but I have to have a real hit. I have to
Mm.
get, 1.5 million views to get around that same amount of money. So it's worse. And how do I defend myself against lawsuits? Um, I'm not going to give you my legal strategy, but I will say that I get threatened with lawsuits fairly regularly, and I have a robust ability to defend myself.